I would want to just lay a basis on to put a context to this discussion on what are digital currencies, what is CBDC, what opportunities exist, especially for regulation, and is there a case for regulation in this sense? And do these opportunities actually present an opportunity for us to get out of debt, in that sense? So I'm just going to ask if it's possible to put up my slides. They look, I think, good, and I'd love to show them off. If not, then I'll be able to share them from here. Okay, that's fine then. Thank you. And so I want to begin from a bit more of data. According to Google Trends data, which is very interesting on who is Googling what. Their opinion is that Nigerians are pretty obsessed with cryptocurrency. They're the most crypto-obsessed country in the world, according to Google Trends data. And two, I would want to just quote something that the World Bank, some World Bank data about the money that's being transmitted into Africa. Out of $48 billion US being remitted to Sub-Saharan Africa, an estimated 562 million is being facilitated through cryptocurrencies, such as Bitcoin, which is interesting. My next slide is on what regulation looks like per country, which is a global metrics on how they're measuring who's regulating cryptocurrencies. And you'd see three sort of categories. One where cryptocurrencies are legal, some that have significant concerns, and where it's mostly legal. So you'll see northern part of Africa, there's a bit of some countries that have actually declared this as legal, like Algeria and Egypt. And so that means that within these particular countries, it's not really easy to use crypto or buy crypto in that sense. My next slide is on what is CBDC. Just looking at CBDCs, which is really important to this discussion on central bank digital currencies, which are digital currencies that are being issued by central banks as legal tender. Crypto is privately issued and they are virtual currencies in the sense, and so they're not ideally issued by government. And so we have different forms of CBDCs that different countries are trying to come up with in terms of having a token-based CBDC, some retail-based CBDCs, as well as account-based CBDCs. Different countries in the world, I think, and now they say about 86% of central banks in the world are already discussing about CBDCs and how they can take that up in that sense. My next slide is on a CBDC tracker that you can see what the worldwide track looks like. There are different stages in which different countries are at. Some are talking about research. Some are looking at proof of concept on what they can be able to do. Some at pilot stage. And then some are at launching stage. And so we have different, aspects of this. I've mentioned about 86% are already in the discussion stage of this. If you look at the global regulation view, we have the next slide is on different interventions that have happened globally in terms of crypto assets, and different institutions are setting up conversations. One, we have the Financial Stability Board that issued the chair's letter in July 2020 to the G20 finance ministers, just providing a report on the international regulatory approaches to crypto assets. Then we also have the Financial Action Task Force that has some recommendations around virtual asset service providers on what they need to do in terms of being licensed or registered, and especially in terms of combating, financing of terrorism. Then the World Economic Forum as well has a governance consortia that was trying to come up with, governance issues around digital currencies. And then finally, OECD, which is always a really key player, has also come up with a document that restricts itself on the, tax and transparency around digital assets. My next slide is on, in our view. Okay, I'm going to speak slowly, but then also there's more time. I will try to balance those two interests. So I will look at the continental regulation overview. From what we see in the African continent, there's about 5 approaches that different countries are taking. So one is the approach of a total ban. And this is Algeria and Egypt that have really come out on this. And they consider crypto as haram under Islamic law, from what is in the news. And two, we have countries that are fast, cautioning against the use of cryptocurrency. That was the first approach by Kenya and South Africa. And then they moved to the next level, where then they were looking at having regulatory sandboxes. And regulatory sandboxes are, let's say, they're safe spaces where government is trying to, give you a place to pilot and play with ideas. And the whole, the law does not apply to you in wholesome. You're given a chance to sort of try it out, and then you're released into the market, if I could use layman terms in that sense. So we have these different countries: Sierra Leone, Kenya, Egypt, Rwanda, actually not Egypt, Rwanda, Mauritius, and Mozambique, and Ghana, and Nigeria, that have tried these approaches towards having these regulatory approaches and sandboxes. And we see this as going either into central bank regulatory sandboxes or the NSC, capital markets authorities looking at this as well. And then we also have, total legal tender adoption, which the Central African Republic has done. And I think El Salvador, outside of the continent, has done this as well. And then the final approach is just to now take it to the next level, where government sees that cryptocurrency is very private. We want a public-facing thing, and we want this to be digital payments that issued by central banks. And so they're going into CDBC and research. And so this is a bit more of the summary of what's happening with Central African Republic making Bitcoin legal tender, and they have a law around that. Then we have South Africa having their project Dunbar in collaboration with the Bank for International Settlements, and just looking at how to run a trial in this sense. Kenya has issued a CBDC research phase, and they had a discussion paper that the lawyers have contributed to, and so they are looking at feasibility. And for the digital...
Sorry, Linda, we seem to have a bit of an echo with the interpretation, but please try and carry on.
Okay.
Nous avons des problèmes avec l'interprétation, s'il vous plaît, et encore l'écho.
Right. I think this will be provided, so you could go through this. But the next slide, which I'm about to finish, is on what are the threats and the opportunities that these things present, both central bank digital currencies and virtual currencies. I will start from, digital currencies. The issue of stability that central banks are providing. Are we willing to take the instability as it appears? If you look at the news, and if you go on Twitter, especially for those who like crypto, there's been a dip. People are still saying buy cryptocurrency even if there's a dip. We've seen influential people in the markets like Elon Musk, sort of tweeting about certain, cryptocurrencies, and people then rushing to buy, and then the market crashes. And so how do we ensure that you still have consumer protection in this sense? There's been issues around money laundering, fraud, this tax avoidance that can come up because then they're not in formal markets, then terrorism funding, as well as data flows. Who owns the data? But what's the opportunity? We've had ICOs, initial...
Quelles sont les opportunités?
Where people are actually using cryptocurrency to raise funds for startups. We've also had opportunities for capital gains tax, where there are different countries that are actually taxing any sort of exchanges or any sale of cryptocurrencies. And then finally, how does Africa benefit, for instance, from a crypto capital? For instance, Hong Kong, which takes me to my next slide on these opportunities. If we're supposed to benchmark, we could borrow a few things. Look at Belgium. It has a special economic area that confers benefits on crypto businesses. And you look at Estonia, that has ensured that any exchange of cryptocurrency is a lawful business that can actually be used to make money. Government is making for it, and they're looking at digital assets as property for tax purposes. The Anti-Money Laundering Act and the Terrorism Finance Act to be able to legislate around this. And Hong Kong is a great place to think through, especially in terms of being a crypto city, where many startups and different companies are moving there because of the favorable conditions. Finally, South Korea, crypto is not banned, but they have decided about the digital identity issues and saying that For you to trade, you cannot be anonymous. You need to be known in this sense so that you still cover the issues around AML and terrorism financing. I think this is my last slide on what are the recommendations. This is the second last slide. What are the recommendations? Is there need for research and development? As more central banks are talking about CBDCs, there's need to put in money for R&D, that we need to understand what these issues are. We need to research them and look for that architecture that is really great for the continent and not something that's borrowed from elsewhere. Is there also need for a regional framework and cooperation and mutual assistance? Because for digital currencies, it's borderless. And so there's need for us to have, cooperation. The AU Digital Transformation Strategy is a really interesting document because it still refers to crypto currencies and looks at ways in which even cybersecurity could be used to ensure that cryptocurrencies as assets can be pursued by states. And so I think that should be pursued a bit more further. And there needs to be a continental strategy around this issue. As we are having an AI strategy, is there a chance to really have a digital asset strategy for the continent? And then also to look at a multifaceted approach towards the regulatory issues, which I think we'll get into. There's consumer protection because people are being fleeced. There's still issues of privacy, AML that I've talked about, digital tax, and even inheritance. What happens when you die to your digital assets? Is Africa ready for that? What about competition, where central banks are ideally in competition with private cryptocurrency providers? Then beneficial declaration. We declare companies. Are we able to actually declare, these different countries have such laws on beneficial declaration? And then classification of these digital assets, and then registration of exchanges. And those are some of the issues that are coming up. And then what's the opportunity cost? Can we take up these crypto assets? Can we see how to raise money through ICOs? Can we look at these startup capitals? What do we have to lose when we centralize or when we decentralize? My final slide is a question that is being posed as we continue to research this issue together with Aphrodite, that what's the impact of these digital currencies on monetary policy and price stability? What do we want in exchange for the initial stability that we had, that these legacy institutions like central banks and IMF and these other institutions that are providing? Are we willing to let go of that stability for another model? And two, as we continue to look at this, can we look at issues of competition and unfair regulation between the central banks and the other organizations? And then finally, is there an opportunity for environmental regulation? One of the cases against crypto is the amount of energy that you're using to mine crypto. Is Africa able to actually benefit from environmental regulation and get carbon credits in return? If you're not the largest, miners of crypto, and comparing what China has been doing around, banning crypto and talking about the energy effects as well. And then finally, how do we rate the success of these regulatory sandboxes in Africa? Are they really working? Are they efficient? Can we model them in a way that it will be able to impact us and elevate us from poverty and get us out of debt?
Policies and practices that put people first. We call for policies and practices that put people first. You and I are the people